So Putin is a war criminal. Putin's a bad guy. Putin is insane. He wants to be czar of the new Soviet Union empire. Putin bad. Everything we do good. Joe Biden good guy. America not empire. America good place.
My fellow Americans, the war in Afghanistan is now over. I'm the fourth president who has faced the issue
Fuck yeah.
of whether and when to end this war. When I was running for president, I made a commitment to the American people that I would end this war.
Man, Trump was right with Sleepy Joe. This man is announcing the end to a 20-year war, and I want to go to bed. This is a war that I've disagreed with for my whole life. And you think I'd be like, fuck yeah! But I want to go to bed. He's fucking Sleepy Joe, baby.
Today, I've honored that commitment. It was time to be honest with the American people again. We no longer had a clear purpose in an open-ended mission in Afghanistan.
We never had one.
20 years of war in Afghanistan, I refuse to send another generation of America's sons and daughters to fight a war that should have ended long ago.
That was shit acting. Shit acting. But yeah, so we invaded Afghanistan after Saudi Arabian nutbags blew up the World Trade Center. And then for 20 years, we continued to fuck it up and rob it of, its natural resources. 20 years ending like this. Mirroring our exit to Vietnam. Plane where people were actually killed too, climbing onto it and falling off. But you know what? Joe may be sleepy. But you know what though? He knows how to be sneaky.
Biden administration could soon release funds for 9/11 victims. The president is expected to use executive authority to access about $7 billion from the Afghan central bank's assets, which are frozen in the American funding system.
What?
The money will fund humanitarian relief in Afghanistan and compensate victims of the 9/11 attacks.
What?
Parts of the funds will also be used in ongoing litigation by U.S. victims of terrorism.
So what? President Biden to release billions in funds for 9/11 victims. That's the news chyron. Talk about propaganda. President Biden to release billions in funds for 9/11 victims. So it sounds like the U.S. government, that's what the chyron is sounding like, is finally going to help all these victims of 9/11 and give them billions of more dollars to help with their medical, whatever, right? Let's listen again.
Biden administration could soon release funds for 9/11 victims. The president...
The Biden administration could soon release funds for victims of 9/11.
Expected to use executive authority to access about $7 billion from the Afghan central bank's assets.
He's going to use executive orders to access about $7 billion of Afghanistan money from the central bank. What? So he's going to use executive authority to steal Afghans' sovereign money, $7 billion that's tied up in the banking system that we froze because we're scumbags. So he's taking $7 billion of Afghanistan's money, and he's going to give $3.5 billion to the 9/11 victims. I want the 9/11 victims to have $3.5 billion. We could shit out $3.5 billion in 2 seconds. We don't need to steal it from the Afghanis. to give it to 9/11 victims. How insane is this? So they're taking the theft of a sovereign nation's capital, its money, its livelihood, the blood, sweat, and tears of its people, and we're going to steal it and give it to some of the people that we obviously don't care about in this country. We're just going to use as a political prop. The families and the victims of 9/11. Insane. Absolutely insane.
Which are frozen in the American funding system. The money will fund humanitarian relief in Afghanistan and compensate victims of the 9/11 attacks.
So there's also the arrogance, the incredible arrogance of the West. So not only are we going to steal $7 billion from you, but we're going to market it as if we're helping our own people who are victims of terrorism, right? And then we're going to take the other half of the money and we're going to help you guys. So I'm going to steal $7 billion from you. I'm going to give you back $3.5 billion, but you're not going to be able to decide how it's spent. I'm actually going to give it to my friends in charitable organizations and NGOs, and they're going to decide how to spend your own money in your own country, which is also another scam, obviously. So absolutely sickening what's going on here. We're stealing billions of dollars. We should have already given the 9/11 victims everything they need with our own treasure and money. Okay? But now what we're doing is we're going to steal $7 billion from the Afghanis. We're going to pretend like we care about 9/11 victims and give them $3 billion or whatever. And then we're going to pretend like we care about the Afghanis and give them $3 billion back, but we're not going to give it to them back. We're going to give it to them through relief efforts. The arrogance of that. To steal money and then say we're doing charity work. And then the arrogance of like, I'll steal your money, I'll give you back half, but you know what? I'm going to decide how you spend that half because your country looks like shit right now and you're having a humanitarian crisis. It's not a humanitarian crisis. This is the aftermath of 20 years of war waged by the United States. It's all our fault. This is crazy. But Putin is a bad guy and Putin's a war criminal. The United States, we're the world's policemen. We're the good guys. We get things right.
Funds will also be used in ongoing litigation by U.S. victims of terrorism.
Spurning demand by the Taliban, Biden moves to split $7 billion in frozen Afghan funds. The president intends to use the Afghan central bank's assets to fund needs in Afghanistan amid a humanitarian disaster and compensate victims of the September 11th, 2001 attacks. You're stealing their money. I'm sure Afghanis know better what they need than Joe Biden. And Afghanistan didn't attack us on September 11th, 2001. They were almost all Saudi Arabians. Washington. President Biden is starting to clear a legal path for relatives of victims of the September 11th, 2001 attacks to pursue $3.5 billion in Afghanistan's central bank has deposited in New York before the Taliban takeover, while also seeking to steer a roughly equal amount towards spending to aid the Afghan people. Why would the Afghan government be on the hook for the September 11th attacks to the relatives of victims of September 11th? The only two governments that should be on the hook are the Saudi Arabian government and the American government. The Saudi Arabian government for funding and financing the goddamn thing, and the American government for much the same reasons, or, in best case scenario, for sitting by and allowing it to happen through stupidity, we'll say. Either way, this is absolutely ridiculous. Beginning that process, Mr. Biden has issued an executive order Friday morning invoking emergency powers to consolidate and freeze all $7 billion of the total assets in Afghan central bank kept in New York. The administration said it would ask a judge for permission to move $3.5 billion to a trust fund it would set up to support the needs of the Afghan people, like for humanitarian relief. Oh, look at us, we're such good guys. The highly unusual set of moves, which the New York Times has first reported was expected, is meant to address a tangled knot of legal, political, foreign policy, and humanitarian problems stemming from the attacks and the end of the 20-year war in Afghanistan. We live in a country of fucking psychopaths. This is the paper of note. This is the New York Times casually doing like ridiculous propaganda on its face. How could you? Only Americans would read this and think this is normal. When the Afghan government dissolved in August, with top officials, including its president and the acting governor of its central bank, fleeing the country, it left behind slightly more than $7 billion in central bank assets on deposit at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Because it was no longer clear who, if anyone, had legal authority to gain access to that account, the Fed made the funds unavailable for withdrawal. I'm pretty sure it's clear who has the legal authority to gain access to that account. Whoever the sovereign government is in Afghanistan today. That happens to be the Taliban. Boo fucking who. You got to give them their money. That would be the legal thing to do. The Taliban, now in control of Afghanistan, immediately claimed a right to the money. That would make sense because they're in control of the country. But a group of relatives of victims of the September 11th attacks, one of several sets who had won default judgments against the group, is one seemingly quixotic lawsuits years ago, sought to seize it to pay off that debt. Afghanistan didn't attack us. Meanwhile, the economy in Afghanistan has been collapsing, leading to a mass starvation that is in turn creating an enormous and destabilizing new wave of refugees and raising a clear need for extensive spending on humanitarian relief. So it seems like the New York Times' only concern with Afghanistan is, one, us being able to steal billions from them, and two, there are going to be a bunch of refugees from this shit. The United States just waged a 20-year war in Afghanistan to replace the Taliban with the Taliban and stole billions of dollars from this new government. We're seeing a huge famine. And we're going to act like the wave of refugees is the biggest issue because obviously that's a quality of life issue for Westerners because why would we have to deal with the dirty mud people in our own cities? It's insane. I mean, the New York Times seems like they're really concerned with the wave of refugees and not the millions of people who are dying needlessly. Insane.
After the Taliban took power, Afghanistan is facing the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. In cities like Kabul, there's no actual shortage of food, but people don't have the cash to buy it.
No shortage of food, people don't have the cash to buy it.
Million people are facing starvation. The economy has simply collapsed. The West has frozen Afghanistan's financial assets, nearly $10 billion worth. And because the Taliban are still classed as a terrorist organization, sanctions have been imposed, which mean the country has run out of cash.
It's a very difficult and challenging time for the people of Afghanistan. But the core need is to help them revive their own economy, their own livelihood. And that is not possible without the state.
Nazir Kabiri was a minister in the previous government, but he felt it was his duty to stay on and work with the country's new masters. One senior British military figure believes it's time to work with Britain's former enemies in order to protect the Afghan people.
I think the West is going to end up recognizing the Taliban government. If that's the case, then we better get on with it sooner rather than later. There's a great phrase, be magnanimous in victory. I think this is an occasion for us to be magnanimous in defeat.
Right.
This is Khosan, outside the city of Herat. On top of everything else, over the past 4 years, Afghanistan has suffered from a devastating drought. People here can't grow their own food any longer. Now they have to queue for handouts.
I feel terrible for my people. It's so sad to see how dependent people are and how desperate people are. It's one of the most difficult times I've ever seen in my life.
The UK government says it's providing £286 million in aid, but the situation is increasingly desperate. Famine added to economic collapse. I've been reporting on Afghanistan for more than 40 years, but I don't think I've ever felt before that I might be watching the destruction of a nation. And you know what? These people have been through so much in the past decades, and they simply don't deserve it. John Simpson, BBC News, Khorasan, Afghanistan.
So thank God we have brave leaders like Joe Biden to steal from some of the poorest people on earth. Help exacerbate one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world. 20 years after 20 years after the beginning of the war that he helped start. Yeah, thank God. Thank God we have leaders like Joe Biden and not like Vladimir Putin, who are, irrational war criminals. We have rational thinking, compassionate human beings to lead our democracy, our free society. What a joke. Afghans struggle with humanitarian crisis, millions on brink of starvation. By mid-2022, 90% of the population could plunge into poverty. Mohammed is one of millions of Afghans on the brink of starvation as their families run out of money. More than 23 million Afghans face acute hunger, including 9 million who are nearly famished, according to the UNICEF World Food Program. By mid-2022, the UN Development Program estimates that 97% of Afghanistan's population will plunge into poverty. Up to 1 million children under 5 could die by the end of the year due to the country's food crisis and the lack of water and sanitation services, according to UNICEF. So, we steal their money. We make sure almost nearly 100% of their country is in poverty. We bombed their country to oblivion. And then before we were there, we helped arm the rebels to fight the Russians there and bomb the Russians to oblivion while the Russians were bombing them to oblivion. The United States is the moral superior to no one. Joe Biden is the moral superior to no one. NATO is the moral superior to no one. How many people around the world are going to die because a couple of thousand people in the United States are going to pull their strings on their puppets in Washington so they could, maintain and expand their fortunes and their power? How many Afghanis are going to die? How many Ukrainians are going to die? How many Russians are going to die? How many poor Americans are going to die so that a few thousand people can make money? And how long will people in our country think people like Joe Biden, are a leader doing the best they can in their circumstances, and Vladimir Putin is a evil villain? When in reality, someone like Joe Biden has way more blood on their hands than Vladimir Putin. He has a much longer resume of death and destruction because he's been in a position of power inside the world's sole superpower for decades. Joe Biden is a war criminal. Vladimir Putin's a war criminal. George Bush is a war criminal. Donald Trump is a war criminal. Barack Obama is a war criminal. If you don't believe me, ask the people of Afghanistan, ask the people of Syria, Libya, Iraq. The United States is full of war criminals. And you know where you could see them? You could see them on TV. You could see them on corporate news. You could see them on YouTube. You can read them in paper of note, the New York Times, the Washington Post. We give our war criminals golden parachutes. We rehabilitate them through our Sunday news programs. The United States is despicable when it comes to shit like this. We're going to steal billions of dollars from the Afghans who didn't even attack us on 9/11, all in the name of 9/11. Meanwhile, we're going to call Vladimir Putin a war criminal and a bad guy and saber rattle with a nuclear power.
Dylan! You son of a bitch! What's the matter? The CIA got you pushing too many pencils? Huh?